On today's episode, we will dive into some deep content that might be hard for some listeners. This episode will deal with death, loss, and suicidal thoughts. Listeners' discretion is advised. If you or anyone you know is dealing with grief or suicidal thoughts, please reach out to someone that will be able to help.
This is always a hard subject for us to deal with. We did an episode last season about grief, about mental awareness, mental health awareness, and I think it's very ideal for us as a show to at least take some time. I mean, I know we have some fun. We kind of get into some deep subjects at times where politics, religion, that type of thing. But it's always good to sit back and remember those who are grieving, because not every day is a good day, especially around the time that this is being released, is right in between Christmas and Thanksgiving and Christmas. So this is when a lot of people are going through it the most, I think, because it's either they're dealing with family members that are just causing problems. They're dealing with the remembrance of a family member that's not with them any longer. Some people like me, I'll be able to see my family for Thanksgiving, but not for Christmas this year. So, it's really hard. And this will be the first year, like the first real Christmas without my daughter as well. Going through the personal stuff that I'm going through and things like that. And I'm not going to get into it, personally. For those that are listening, my daughter is alive. She's fine. But, some complications with the family and things like that. This will be the first year that I won't have her around for Christmas, fully. And it's going to be hard. I mean, it's really going to be hard. So, but, we deal with grief in many ways, whether it's death, divorce, disownment. A lot of people are kind of disowned by their family, especially nowadays, based on your beliefs and stuff like that. I mean, it's sad, but, so many things happen in this world that really just make life hard to handle. So we're going to kind of go through a little bit with this, with you guys, and hopefully we can be a help to someone. As we did mention before, we will dive deep into some subjects. So just be advised. I mean, if it's hard to deal with, if it's hard to handle, we encourage you to stop listening, seek the proper help that you need. Don't take our show as a help, to be honest with you.
We're not therapists.
I mean, yeah, we're not. We're in fact, just like any other human being in this world, we are going through it just as much as anybody else. And so with all that being said, we're going to kind of just jump right into it, guys. They always talk about the 5 steps of grief, and, I wonder how that really affects certain people. So, for those who don't really know, the 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. No matter what you're going through, chances are you have gone through at least one of these stages, if not all of them at some point. And so we're going to kind of break it down a little bit and try to talk about, not necessarily each step, but deal with
the grief process.
Yeah, the grief process in a whole. Because I'm curious to know, like, how many people have started to go through this process and have kind of gotten stuck.
Sure.
Because I know for myself, around this time last year, I was really going through a very deep depression, kind of hit that depression, and looking back through everything that I've gone through and over the past couple of years, I can kind of see each step
Sure.
that I've taken. I've kind of gotten to the point where it's pretty much accepted, of what I need to do as far as like moving forward and stuff like that. But then it's like I've met people who have gotten into, the denial part where, it's like basically that out of sight, out of mind type thing where if they don't think about it, it didn't really happen. Or they've gotten into the anger part of it, they've gotten into the depression part, and they've just stopped. And that's where I feel like there's an issue. So I'm going to ask you guys some questions, and I want you guys to kind of like,
Sure.
Both of you, I want to get both of your inputs on this.
Just real quickly before you ask your questions,
Yeah.
and what you're about to ask might cover this, but I think it's important to keep in mind that it is a good general rubric, and I think people do tend to follow that pattern. But also, I think some people do indeed break that pattern, not just by getting stuck on one point, but sometimes by having both points simultaneously, or going into acceptance and then coming out. So I think acceptance can become denial. And not just end on acceptance, or acceptance can become bargaining if unchecked. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think there are times where it's a 40-step list, or sometimes where it's a 2-step list, anger and acceptance, so I think it's case by case.
I kind of tend to agree with you on that because, I've seen it where people have they've gone through the 5 steps, from denial to acceptance. And then, like you said, sometimes acceptance can become denial if you're not careful, and it basically starts the process all over again. Yeah. And again, this is a wide variety of different things. It doesn't have to deal with just, death, the death of a loved one or anything like that. People, especially around this time, go through a lot of divorce. I think right now, it's like the average divorce rate is almost 60% now, where a couple of years ago it was just down to 50, which 50 is just as bad. But now we're almost like to 60%, where it's like not even, 4 out of 10 families are actually staying together, whether, with the mom and the dad and things like that. And, it's like, and I know that some people will see divorce as a good thing. It's like you see these posts, you see these TikTok videos, stuff like that, where people talk about divorce, and it's like, oh, they're having this big party because they finally just got divorced from this person and, such and such. But it's kind of one of those things of you're taking one whole thing and you're splitting it in 2. Is it really ever going to be whole again? So the first question that I have for you guys, and I want both your input on this, is there an actual level to grief? Like, is a certain type of loss worse than another one in comparison to how people deal with it?
I think so. I think it's less of a precise chart and more of a general outline, though. Okay. So for some people, a divorce is harder for a death, depending on the person who died. They might have not been as close to that person who died, so for them, that particular death is not as difficult as a divorce. If, same thing with an animal. Let's say an animal you've had for 10 years that you've built a connection with dies, and then a cousin you've met once dies. Well, in a sense, I would say the human has more value, but for the person grieving the loss of the animal, it's going to hit harder. So there are general principles that apply, that those who are closer to you when they die, or the longer or the more intimate the relationship, when it's severed, it hurts more. And those general principles tend to apply, but there are exceptions. For example, the animal that you're closer to might have more value than the person in those rare exceptions. And that's just one example. There's many, but I do think there is a general sense in which there are different levels of grief. And I think even in the language we have in English, that's expressed. So you can have someone that's sad. Well, sadness can be a part of grief. And then you have, and depression is more of a clinical term now, but it used to be, so if someone's melancholic, that's like a deep, overwhelming depression. So someone can be sad but not melancholic, or someone can be, or grieving. Well, grieving is considered, this very weighty term. Mm-hmm. So I can be upset and sad, but that, and that's a type of grief, right. But that's not the same as like depression or melancholy. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think there are different levels of it, and I think it just goes by a case by case basis.
Yeah, I have to pretty much agree. I don't have a lot to add to what he said, because I was just thinking about that. Like, you can, and I have felt shame for this before, and I think one of the things I want to tell our listeners is maybe you don't need to feel shame if you feel apathetic towards one thing that is horribly tragic, and mm-hmm. everyone around you is wondering why you feel apathetic towards it. Mm-hmm. And then you're grieving hard over something that doesn't seem like as big a thing, but to you it was. Mm-hmm. Like everything is relative, right? So if, like you said, if a cousin that I've met once passes away, I won't be happy about it, obviously, but it's not going to hit me as hard as, say, if my cat passes away. Mm-hmm. Because that cat is an ever-present part of my life, day in, day out.
Right.
So it kind of, it kind of depends on how close you are and how much it directly affects you. Right. If it's affecting your day-to-day life, you're going to notice it more. Mm-hmm.
Yet the relation you have to the thing that was lost, or the situation that caused you to grieve, the relation you have with that thing is what's going to determine its intensity for the most part. And I don't think Dave would say generally that a cat is of more value than a person. But I also think...
I mean, have you met some people that
Have you met cats? Cats are horrible creatures.
So are a lot of my previous coworkers, but,
Are they people?
Unfortunately. I mean, maybe.
How are we defining people?
Yeah, I was going to say, you look today.
No, but I just mean, like, as a general category, people, in my opinion, are more value than animals.
Right.
Which is why I don't eat people. I eat animals, and I don't eat cats, but still.
Well, if people are of more value, that's just the more expensive meat.
Yeah, and I'm broke, so I'm not going to do that. No, but I do think that there's that general principle, but because there's a relational difference, mm-hmm.
right,
you value it differently.
I see my cat every day.
I don't see
my cousin every day because they're in Wisconsin or wherever.
Exactly. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think Dave kind of hit it, and I mean you both did. Where what I was thinking as well of, you take something that's been a part of your life, like you go home to see. Whether it's a person, whether it's an animal, a pet or something like that, you see that person, or you see that, that being every single day, and then suddenly they're not there. There's that bit of a kind of like an empty space.
There's a hole.
Yeah.
Especially when you catch yourself in a routine that involved, like, say, a pet. Like, you find yourself getting ready to pour food or something, and like, oh, they're not there anymore.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys, I've never experienced this. I haven't had a lot of people very close to me die. Mm-hmm. Just hasn't happened yet. I've been blessed in that way. But I know that a lot of people who lose, like, spouses to death or divorce mm-hmm. will, if you live in a suburban house, you yell between rooms a lot,
yep.
Yep. And, you yell to the other person as if they were in another room because you assume they're within a shout's and they're not there.
Yeah.
There's also the converse of that where you swear you heard someone.
Yeah.
Where you swear you heard that departed person yelling your name, and then you think about it for a second, and the sadness hits you all over again.
Yeah.
And that's why the cycle can reset itself, because the brain's patterns come back up, and then you get knocked back into anger or knocked back into denial.
Right.
So
right. Yeah, because I know, like, I've talked to a few people from back home that have dealt with the loss of a loved one and loss of a spouse. And one of the guys that I had talked to, he said for the first month at least, he would sit down and he would start talking almost like he's having a conversation, and then he would kind of like look over and he's like, oh, then it would hit him, because he's so used, like you said, he's so used to doing something that it's hard to even break that routine. It's like, I know people who still, they go through a routine, years after the loss of a spouse, and they still go through the same routine because it keeps them going sometimes. Sure. But it's like, I wonder sometimes, like, does that hurt or does it help more? And I think that kind of depends on the person.
It also depends on the routine and the pattern, because it can be like, you remember the food they used to cook and you're like, oh, what a wonderful memory. And like, I think that also depends on what stage you're in. Because if you're in acceptance, you can look back on and love those memories. But if you're still in anger, the memories that come up are just going to make you bitter.
Right. They're just painful.
So yeah, it depends on the memory and where you're at in the process.
And this kind of does bring into my next question. I know we've kind of just talked about it some too, but what are some ways that like loss will affect our lives? Again, it doesn't matter what the loss is. What are some ways that it affects people? And like you said, it's like memories is a great part of it, because depending on the reaction to those memories, it's like I know that I've lost loved ones, like with my grandparents. My parents are still alive right now. I've lost all but one grandmother, as far as grandparents go, and it's like every day it's like I see things and it just reminds me of them. A couple of days ago I was in a junkyard, trying to take care of some stuff, and I saw a car just like the one that my grandpa used to drive, and man, it just it brings back those memories, and things like that. But it's not one of those. It wasn't one of those anger memories. It was like you said, it was one of those just like, I can remember this. I remember being in that type of car. I remember it's like things that we used to go do and stuff like that. And it brought back a lot of good memories. But then it's like, the more you start to think about it, the more you start to really miss the person and things like that. So what are some other ways that a loss or grief will really affect somebody's life?
Yeah, I think one of the things it does is, like we already said, it leaves a gap or a hole. I also think grief makes it difficult to form new relationships. Some
because
people,
you don't want the pain of loss to come back.
Exactly. So with dating, okay, or marriage or whatever, heck, even with friendships, if you've been burned by a friend doing you wrong and you had a close connection with that friend, and even if it wasn't sexual and they burned you, it's hard to trust new people. That I mean, but with relationships, if they die or they leave you or whatever, family or whatever grief it is, it's hard to establish new relationships because you're scared. You're scared of feeling that pain again. And I think for people who've had some people just get unlucky and have a lot of people in their lives die within a short period. And for that people, it's like, I don't want to make new friends. They'll die. And they get kind of that doom mentality in their head. Right. Or with relationships, I've had a lot of my friends who are very loyal, great guys. Women they date who they treat well cheat on them profusely. So why don't they want to date other women? They're terrified they'll get cheated on, And so I've seen betrayal, but also just death and loss make people hesitate to form those new connections. And oftentimes it's those good new connections that will help you grieve. Yeah. And that doesn't mean rushing into a new relationship is the answer all the time, but it means that people supporting and loving you is often helpful in grief. And the wicked thing that grief does is it makes you ball up and protect.
It makes you isolate yourself.
When you should be reaching out. So
And yeah, I mean, and the whole time you were talking about that, it's like I was thinking, like I've seen, videos, especially like on TikTok, that that talk about, because you're talking about like relationships and stuff like that, of how, especially in a man perspective. I mean, we can't speak for the women perspective of it because we're not women.
What you think?
It's like we can only say like what we know and things like that. But I think it's very true, especially with a man, whether it's betrayal or death, that a man has two forms of love. There's the deep form of love that they have for that very first, like, true love. And after that's gone, whether it's, heartbreak, from being, betrayal, anything like that, somebody leaving, or a death of that person, the next form of love that you'll get from a man is the type that is very
Reserved.
Cautious. Yeah.
and very cautious. Yeah, because it's like you said, it's like dealing with friendships and things like that. I've had that where personally, where I've had those types of people in my life that it's like I absolutely just would do anything for them.
Sure.
Love them, to no end, and have been betrayed. And now I'm to the point where it's like, okay, if you want to do something that's going to hurt me, I have no problem with leaving you behind.
Yeah.
And, it's like it kind of gets to that, like what we were talking about, that 5 stages of grief, where it's almost like it almost becomes like a 6th stage.
Yeah,
I guess.
Defensiveness. Yeah.
Because you're afraid to, like you said, to be hurt again, or to have something happen again, to have that hole, torn even wider. But something that I want to go back to that you had said, where it's like, sometimes it's those connections that can kind of help you get through that grieving process. My question is could it also possibly hurt the grieving process just as much?
Yes.
And why do you think that?
Because it's good connections that do that, right? So if I'm grieving, well, I can connect myself to heroin. Like I can go do that. I can connect myself. Let's say it was an abusive relationship. I can connect myself to another abusive relationship. Or I can enter a new healthy relationship and berate the person with my pain in an unhealthy and unfair way that hurts them and myself. So, and that same way with friendship. I can be attracted to certain personality types I want to be friends with subconsciously. Mm-hmm. And then when I'm hurt by someone who is vindictive like that, I meet someone else who's vindictive like that. So, discerning what type of people, you should always have some caution about what people you let into your life. But that's amplified when you're grieving, whether that's a good or a bad thing. It just is amplified. And so you still need to filter who you're opening up to and being close to, but you have to balance that with knowing that you need people, that you really do. And time alone is good. Time alone is needed for grief, but so is community. So it is a balancing act of not getting so defensive you don't let people who love you help you, but also not rushing to use people just as a fix. So,
okay.
Yeah, that's very difficult. My kind of question that I thought of while you were saying that is, it's more what happens when you lose the close person that you would have needed for support when you lost someone else. Because we all have kind of at least a small network of friends that are really close. They're like, I can tell anything to this person. What happens when you lose one of those?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when you do that, that's hard because we're blessed with people like that, okay? Mm-hmm. A lot of people aren't. I've met so many people. If you ever want to be sad, talk to people about their personal lives at a party. Okay.
Very true.
And the reason I say that is because people drink a little bit and then they're like, yeah, nobody loves me. I can't talk to anyone. Nobody's there for me. And they might be lying, but most of the time I don't think they are. So it's like sometimes you only got one close friend. That person bites it. And you have a bad family life and all your other friends are shallow. You tell them about your grief. They don't want to hear it. What do you do? And honestly, and I don't want to get super religious with this video, but I'd say like, dude, at that point, like go find a pastor to talk to. Even if you're not religious, like they've dealt with people grieving before, and they will love you, right? And be willing to listen if nothing else. So there's that.
At least a good pastor would. Like you
well, that's
gotta
the other
watch
thing.
out. It's kind of a minefield.
Well, that's the other thing. There's a lot of manipulative pastors who might, I mean, and so that's the thing is life is a minefield.
Yes.
You know, so when you get into grieving, it's like, okay, well, you can't open up too much, but you can't. It's like it's like a balancing act after you got hit in the head. It's like it's impossible.
Right.
And that's kind of the tough thing about grief is eventually we just kind of have to go like a heavy sigh and wait it out. Like, you know, there's not a fix. Right. There's things that help the process, but yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to go too long there.
No, it's fine. You know, because I'm thinking like, and I'm going to kind of be the vindictive one in a sense, you know, because it's like you're talking about, you know, it's like you find people that'll help you. You find like those types of people that, you know, will the healthy type of relationships, whether it be friendships or, you know, relationships or something like that, finding somebody that can connect to, you know, connect you to the next point of that grief process in the right way. The issue that I've seen, especially with a lot of people, be it, you know, church people, be it, you know, non-church people, you know, for those who really know us, like we do get into religious discussions. You know, I'm very, I'm not gonna say I'm spiritual because you know, it's a constant process. Yeah. But I hate saying like I'm religious too, because religion is very looked down on. I go to church. I'll put it that way. I am a Christian. I'll put it that way.
Religion is dope.
It's like I am a Christian. I know Noah, you're very passionate about it. You know, Dave, we've kind of talked a little bit about it and stuff like that. You know, I don't know exactly like where you guys stand as far as that goes, but something that I've seen is a lot of people will go to the religious side of it, and sometimes it'll help them, and then sometimes it pushes them further back.
Yeah, that's true.
Because, and what I've noticed like a lot of, you know, like when people are going through the grieving process is you get these people that are just like, well, it can't rain every day, or, you know, everybody's going through something themselves, or, you know, stuff like that. And it's kind of like, it's almost like you're belittling what the person is going through.
Yeah, you're invalidating someone because their grief, quote, isn't big enough or isn't strong enough or something.
Right. Or, you know, it's like I've seen it, you know, at funerals.
Yeah.
You know, the family is sitting there sobbing over the death of their loved one, and then a person comes up, and it usually is a Christian person that comes up and was like, all things work together for good. That's not what you need to hear. Yeah, that's not what you need to hear at that point. And I think, you know, it tends to turn people away from...
Well, because words like that are cliche at this point.
Yes.
They sound hollow. When you say that out loud, just when you said it as an example, you weren't even trying to say that to comfort someone. It sounded hollow and meaningless.
And my heart rate like jumped. So I was like kind of mad. I'm like,
because you recognized it.
Well, because there's something can be true but not prudent to say at that time. Okay, like when someone falls to their death, you don't say gravity's strong, man. Like that's not what you do.
Oh, gravity works.
We know gravity works. We just saw it, and I think with the religious context, and I'm a Christian, and I believe in heaven and hell, but people are like they're in a better place. It's like, Okay, well,
But what am I supposed to do? I'm still here.
but oftentimes grieving isn't thinking someone's in hell.
Right.
Grieving is missing their presence.
Right.
Now, I can be happy that I can believe someone is with the Lord and be happy that they're happy. And yet I can still, because I'm a selfish jerk of a man who's not a perfect Christian, I can be mad that the Lord took them.
I don't think it's that selfish because basically you're missing someone. You had a very good, powerful connection in your life that's suddenly gone.
Yeah.
Right.
So grief doesn't always mean I think they didn't go to an afterlife, or it doesn't even mean that I don't think they went to heaven. But for a religious person, grief is still, they're not here.
Right.
I have to, even if I think I have to wait to see them, even if I think I'll die and go to heaven and see them, they're not here to do life with me anymore.
Right.
Yeah, I have to navigate life without their presence.
Yeah, without them.
Yeah.
I'm still, who's gonna pick up the kids from school now that my wife's dead?
Mm-hmm.
Who am I gonna talk to at 3 and I'm gonna miss their smile. Yes, they're in heaven. Yes, I'll see them in heaven, but they're gone.
Right.
So the religious, it can be comforting,
Mm-hmm.
but when you assure people of heaven is when there's doubt of that, when that's the issue, not when missing them is the issue. So when it comes to religious people, I would recommend just love people. Don't use the cliches. Be there for them. And if you want to help them from a religious perspective, and they're religious or not religious, pray for them. If they are religious and they ask for prayer, pray with them, but don't resort to these stupid cliches. Okay? Just be available, love people, pray for them. That's it.
Right.
Right.
And I do believe, and I mean, I do believe as a Christian, just like the Bible says, that all things do work together for good. Because it does, whether, one way or the other, it's going to work to the best of intentions. God has his reason for taking certain people. Sometimes it could be to get a hold of the family. Could be, to actually break somebody down, to the point where they do have to rely on God, that type of thing. And it's like you said too, it's like, there's a time and a place for it where, it's, as a Christian, I'm not going to come up to somebody that's dealing with a loss and be like, well,
they're in hell.
Yeah, they're in hell. I'm sorry.
I've seen that. I've seen that. And I mean, so that's why I brought it up.
Yeah.
And anybody who would actually say that to a grieving person is not actually a Christian, in my view.
Well, they're not living out. Yeah, no, they're not living out the Christian faith.
life.
They're claiming to be a Christian, but they're a hypocrite at best.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for the record, Christians are hypocritical. The main issue is because we all are. But the issue is
human
when
nature.
Yeah, the issue is when they're not trying to not be hypocritical.
Right.
When you're not acknowledging your own faults is the main issue.
And there are times like they do have the best intention when they come up and they try to help somebody, that's grieving or that's going through a process and stuff like that. But
some people are just bad at comforting people.
Right.
That's
right.
true. That's me.
And
Yeah,
that does lead me to the next question because actually before that, because I do want to get into something too. I want to see your opinions on this as well. But where you talked about you can go through the grieving process and adapt with the wrong type of people. You can adapt with the with alcohol or drugs or things like that. And something that I've noticed with people in particular is that going from a relationship to relationship, you tend to find the people that you're attracted to are the people that you're trying to get away from.
Sure.
For example, it's like going through divorce, or actually even before that, trying to find the right person that you marry, you tend to look towards somebody that's going to remind you of your parents. The reason why I say that is because a lot of people will say, it's like, oh yeah, basically you married your dad or you married your mom, meaning that you married somebody that closely resembles the people that you grew up with. It's like my sister got married to, her husband, and in certain ways is just like my dad.
Sure.
Like he and my dad can get along well with each other in certain areas. My ex-wife and my mom, they couldn't get along together very well, but I saw things that she did that reminded me of my mom when I was growing up.
Yeah.
And so saying that, it's like when somebody goes through a divorce or they go through a loss and they start looking for, I don't want to say the replacement, but they start looking for the next relationship. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes they tend to find that exact same type, if not a little bit worse.
Yeah.
It's comfort. That's the type of person that you're comfortable with. That's why statistically people will go with people who remind them of one or both of their parents, mm-hmm. because generally speaking, at least I would hope so, that your parents are a comforting presence in your life, mm-hmm. at least usually. So our brains are kind of wired. This goes into like addiction studies and all that, but our brains are kind of wired to seek out that thing that is comforting.
Mm-hmm. And sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I'll try and be a little vague and not super personal.
No, you're fine.
But I've made that mistake myself with like relationships. Is you like someone, doesn't work out, right? Mm-hmm. You date for however long, doesn't work out, and then you meet someone new, and you're like, oh, finally, like I've dealt with this, I can date this person now, and everything's good. And you don't view them as a replacement, and then they leave, and who do you grieve? Do you grieve the person you just lost? No, you grieve the other person.
The one before.
You don't even miss the person you just lost. Mm-hmm. You only miss the other person before them, because you only like this person because of how they reflect the other one.
Right.
And I made a mistake one time where I did that twice in a row, and it compounded. Okay. Mm-hmm. And that was a really bad idea, but that's what happened. And I had to step back and I had to tell myself, like, you can't date for a long time. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't really trying to meet anyone for about a little over a year, because I knew I dated someone, I would spiral again. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, sometimes if you find yourself in a pattern of making toxic connections, you need to take a break. So, and even if that's hard, even if that's causes loneliness, I think there is some times where you have to say the loneliness, and not every case is different, but there are some times where you have to say the loneliness is worth me not hurting somebody. So
once again, it's more or less an addiction cycle.
It is.
And you have to break it. Yeah. Because it's a dopamine hit. Oh, you meet someone, they seem great, they remind you of this other person who was really comforting. It's more dopamine, it's more serotonin. Mm-hmm. And then your brain is just trained to crave even more of that.
Yeah.
And then when it doesn't work out, you're at a loss.
Yeah. And that it's all of this is leading me to the next question. And I know we kind of just, it's interesting because the stuff that we're talking about is literally stuff that I want to know for the next question that we have.
Well, that means that your questions follow a logical order, which is good.
They kind of do on this one. They
kind of know it's us, sure. So maybe not.
Yeah, we kind of have a logic of illogic, basically.
Disagree.
Yes. We are controlled chaos.
Who?
This show.
This show?
Yes.
That should have been the name of our show.
Controlled chaos.
Yes. That's very true.
I have another name idea.
Oh, goodness.
It might be a little offensive.
Oh, goodness.
I was thinking Tism time.
Tism time. Oh.
You can cut that out if you need to.
Well, this kind of shows controlled chaos here. But no, the next question that I really had was, it's like, how can we get through the process, get through that grief process properly? Mm-hmm. Because, we know that looking back at it, sitting on the outside of it, we know that suicide is not the answer to any question. Sure. It's not the correct answer to anything. We know that drugs is not the correct answer to a process. Mm-hmm. We know that alcohol honestly is not really the answer to a process. I mean, again, I'll go back to what the Bible says. The Bible does say that, and I'm kind of paraphrasing it on this, of, if someone is hurt, is heartbroken, you give them something.
Yes,
you might be able to help me remember.
Yeah,
that,
so in the Proverbs, it's like if someone is beyond consolement, you give them strong drink. But I also think you have to take that in the full context of the Bible of like exercising prudence.
Right.
It's like, oh, well, this guy is an alcoholic and his wife died. We should give him alcohol. It's like, no, you don't give him alcohol.
Yeah.
And I think that advice should be used sparingly. Some people shouldn't drink when they're sad. My friends and I, some of my friends have struggled with alcohol in the past, right? And so they don't drink. But other ones who haven't struggled with alcohol, because they've seen some people struggle, they have rules where it's like, when I'm sad, I don't drink. I think in some rare cases, having a drink to settle your nerves in the grieving process, fine. But it should be used sparingly. Because right before that, Solomon is talking about prudence and self-control. And so it is at the end of a whole chapter of prefaces. So it doesn't mean, oh, you're grieving, go get plastered. No, it's like on a rare occasion, if you're grieving, and it's right at the time, depending on your situation, have a drink. But that's entirely different than how it could be taken and abused.
Right. So. Well, and like David even said too, it starts that addiction cycle where, it's like, okay, I'm going to have a drink because I'm feeling, super sad. It's like I'm depressed. You're inconsolable. So, you take that drink and you start to feel better at that moment. Well, then the next time you start going through that process in your mind, you're kind of thinking already, maybe I'll just take another one because it helped. It helped the last time. Yeah. And so because
in that first moment, you wired your brain to associate alcohol with feeling better.
Right. And I know that addictions don't just start, with the snap of a finger. I mean, there's multiple layers that kind of lead up to a strong addiction. But it does start. And I've seen a lot of times alcoholism or drug abuse starts in that grieving process where they're so sad, that they're so inconsolable, that somebody offers them.
Yeah, it depends on the grief also. Like, okay, well, grief is a general term, like we talked earlier. It can mean severe, deep depression of loss, right? But it can also just be like, you're very sad and hurt about something. Like it's a spectrum. I hate that term, but it's a spectrum.
Yeah.
And so buddy just went through a breakup, girl he's been dating a few months. It was rough, but not life ending, right? Wasn't his first breakup, won't be his last type thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so what do? Hey, we'll have a whiskey and a cigar. And that's that. If you know your friend can handle that, maybe, depending on whatever. But that's different from my wife of 30 years died in a car accident when I was driving.
Yeah.
Don't give that guy whiskey, even if he asks for it.
Right.
There's different, I think there's, because there's different stages of grief, what you give people to take care of that. It's like, you don't get a brain surgery just because you have a headache and you take Advil. So it's like the same thing.
Right.
Yeah, what you need in that moment is counseling, not drugs or alcohol.
Not drinking.
Yeah. And, I've seen it too where, it's like, and I know we've all have seen, typical things like this where, okay, you get somebody, and here's where I have the hard time. It's like, even though the Bible does, talk about like what we said, does talk about like there's a certain time when you could give somebody a strong drink. In the Bible, strong drink means alcohol.
Yeah.
It does also talk about in Proverbs that, strong drink is...
Be not drunk with wine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it talks about, it's like, what is it? Strong drink is raging, or wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, and whoever is deceived by their wise is not wise.
Yeah.
I know I kind of messed that up just a little bit, but, we start to look for... What I've seen is you get that point where you need that drink at that time. Okay,
Yeah.
you're inconsolable. You're uncontrollable. There's nothing else that's going to satisfy that hurt. And when it starts that addiction process,
Mm-hmm.
you tend to look for every opportunity.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, my wife of 30 years died. This is my first time taking a drink. And so you take a drink and then, it's like, yeah, you decide you're going to take another one because you miss her so much, like a month down the road. Well, then that month leads to a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And then it's like you keep remembering it. And then it just starts to be like, okay, I just stepped on my dog's tail for the first, for the fifth time this week. I might as well go drink because I'm heartbroken now.
Yeah.
And and I know I'm not trying to mock that. I'm not trying to make fun of the addiction thing because it's a very deep cycle. It's a very deep hole that people get into, whether it's alcohol, whether it's drugs, whether it's, we've talked about it, whether it's pornography, things like that. And typically a lot of people tend to look towards those things during a grief process because it, quote unquote, it fills that hole for a moment. And obviously that's not the proper way to look into these things. So what is a proper way that we can actually work through this process, of grief or with loss? And we don't even have to keep using the word grief. I mean, we can use the word loss, because most of the time, any form of grief is because of a loss of something. Mm-hmm. You're not grieving the fact that you won the lottery, in your life. You're not grieving the fact that you have $100,000 house. You're grieving the fact that the person that you owned that house with is no longer with you. That type of thing. So, I mean, we can just keep it as just this form of loss, but how do we get through that properly without, diving into that deep cycle of an addiction process, basically?
So I think we've pretty much covered most of it already. Your closest friends, you need support. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, counseling from a pastor or possibly
psychologist
from a licensed therapist.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, even outside of religion, pastors do have to take marriage and grief counseling classes. Yeah. So they essentially have in the pastoral degree is actually in most of them is a minor in counseling. Mm-hmm. So because an MDiv, which is the typical master's for a pastor, is it's not just a theology degree, it's also a counseling and a ancient language degree. So it's multifaceted, mm-hmm. which is why it's like typically a 3 years master's degree instead of a 2-year master's. So it's like it's like a longer master's degree. Yeah. So the one other thing, and maybe this isn't there's some things wrong with this advice. When we're grieving or when have lost something or someone, we things we like to do don't seem as fun anymore, right?
Right.
And that can happen, and that often does happen. But
especially if it's something you did with that person,
yeah. But one of the things when I was having a bad day growing up, my dad would say, "Hey, like even if he had things he had me to do around the house, if he knew." Because he could always tell. I don't know. I'm an open book, but he could always tell for all of us if we were just going through it, even if we didn't say anything. Mm-hmm. And he sometimes he just like come in around and be like, "Hey, don't worry about the chores. Do something you want to do." And it's like in life, especially if you're an adult, there's some things you can't skip. But when you're in the grieving process, be patient with yourself, mm-hmm. I guess. Mm-hmm.
That's very good advice.
And try to do something you want to do, even if you can't enjoy it fully. And there are ways that can go bad with drugs and pornography and random sex. But it's like, I really like fishing. Go fish, okay? Oh, I really like, even if it's playing a video game, go put on an album you like and play the video game or whatever. Mm-hmm. If it's not damaging you, try to, be patient with yourself in that process and try and find something that is not damaging, but you can just try and enjoy the little things, Mm-hmm. So, which grief makes exponentially harder, but but still.
And never feel shame.
Yeah, no.
For the amount of grief, or how, even if you're not grieving a lot, like I said earlier, don't feel shame because you don't feel as bad as you think you should about something.
Yeah.
And I think that has to be one of the hardest things, like what you guys both said, not feeling shame and having patience with yourself. And as far as a loss goes, that typically is what leads to suicide. Is people, they don't want, they want the pain to end of that loss or that grief. They might feel shame about, mourning that person or mourning the loss of something, that's in their life.
Especially if you think it's your fault that you lost them for whatever reason.
And it's very hard to get to that point of saying, it's like, okay, I have to be patient with this. It's a process. That's the thing. It's like grief is not it can't be just a 5-step thing. They always talk about it, like we said, there's that 5 stages, but each stage is a process that you have to go through. And a lot of people, I think, they get stuck and they just don't see an end to that process. And so they find their own end. And
grief is not a bullet point on the to-do list. It's like, it's not just, oh, I get it done.
Right.
It's like, no. This might take a lot longer than you're even aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And so patience with grief is, because it also depends on the person's psychology. There are people who lose people and they're just ruins the next 20 years.
Yeah.
And that's tough. And honestly, there's depths to this discussion we just can't express in this podcast.
Right.
Yeah.
Partially because we're not where they're at.
Right.
So we can have these general discussions, these general principles, and I think it's good for people to hear this. I think this is a really good discussion. But at the end of the day, you're the one who has to grieve.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a very personal thing, and you're not going to go through exactly the same thing that other people go through.
Right. And that's why the thing you said about other people wanting others to grieve how they do or at the same level is so problematic. And I think the reason they're doing that is because when you had that loss, you feel like you don't have control.
Mm-hmm.
So to have control, you want to monitor how other people grieve.
Yeah.
And I've had a friend who had a loved one pass, and I won't name names, of course, but people were mad at him for how he grieved. And it hit him 4 months later, and it hit him hard.
Mm.
And he really had to sit those people down and say, what you did to me wasn't fair.
Yeah.
And actually it made things harder on him later on because they were grieving by controlling other people's grief.
Yep.
And then it made it to where he couldn't deal with it.
It's almost like you're grieving vicariously. You always hear the thing, you're living vicariously through someone, and it happens whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. Whether it's a something good happening in your life or a loss, you tend to push it onto somebody else because you want them. I think with people in general, we want to know that we're not alone.
Yeah.
And
we want to validate our own feelings. We need to feel validated.
We need to feel validated. And a way to feel validated is by making sure somebody else is literally feeling the same thing we're feeling. Yeah. But like what we've all said, it's like you're not going to feel the same way that somebody else feels. My loss hit me differently than somebody else. When I remember the first my first grandpa, my pawpaw is what we called him. When he died, I remember getting the phone call that he had passed away, and just sitting down, and I couldn't think. I didn't cry. I didn't really mourn. I just couldn't think. And, so many people were like, oh, I'm so sorry. Come here. It's, giving me hugs and stuff like that. And I remember just kind of being numb to it, just not really processing it.
Sure.
And it actually didn't hit me until the day of the viewing we got there, and it's like all the family members are there. Both sides of my family, my mom's side of the family, it was her dad that died. My dad's parents, my other grandparents, things, they were there because we're all a close family. And I remember walking up to the casket and seeing my grandpa and just being the strong one. Like I had to be the strong one for my grandma or for my nana, for a couple of my cousins and stuff like that. And being up there, and I remember going and sitting down and see here.
Yeah, man. It's okay.
We talk about this. But I remember going and sitting down in the pew and not feeling really anything until my other grandpa came up to me and hugged me. And I mean, I'm going to be quite honest with you, I lost it.
Yeah.
At that point. And I remember seeing like so many other family members during that time just being incontrollable, being inconceivable, or not inconceivable, inconsolable. It's what I meant to say. And it's like the whole time, it's like I had to be the strong one for other people. And until that point came, and it's like it makes you think this, like, okay, yeah, it's going to hit everybody differently. It's going to hit everybody, certain other losses that's in my life, and I won't try to get, I'm not going to get detailed into things.
Sure.
You guys know more than anybody else. For those who have listened to our last episode about grief and the mental awareness that we had last season, I am going to kind of get into that a little bit more, of the fact of, here recently, going through a process of my own, I actually got to the point where I thought suicide was the answer.
Yeah. And
it's hard because you sit there and you think about, that's not that can't be the way this has to go. You sit there and you think about, it's like, okay, suicide is not the proper answer. We talked about that again, but it's like we get to that point sometimes in our lives where we want that answer because we want the pain to go away. And so, and that's the reason why I was asking, it's like asking you guys, like, how, do we process this properly? And I know, we get emotional. I mean, I get emotional when it comes to this type of stuff because it's something that I've gone through. It's something that I've been through. And, again, what I feel, where my emotions go, may not be what somebody else is going to take from it. It's like our listeners may hear that story and may just be like, oh, he's sad. But it hit me a lot different than it's going to hit anybody else.
Yeah, because you actually knew that person, and
right.
So you're still grieving them a little bit right now. How many years ago was that?
Oh man, it's been. I honestly, it's been over 20 years, I think.
Yeah, but you still love your grandpa, right? So yeah, you're still sad that they're departed and you can't talk to that person anymore. Or
yeah,
see them.
Yeah, and I still see pictures that I have on my phone and stuff like that of my grandpa. Right before he died, and one of the greatest memories that I have of him. And I'm not going to get deep into the story, but it was actually right before he died. We celebrated their 50th anniversary. He had to be in the hospital, because of it. But I mean, we literally celebrated the 50th anniversary, and just within a couple of days, he had passed away. And so, it's like, it's those types of things that we tend to go through. And even going back to what I was saying earlier about, my depression had hit so hard within the past couple of years that I thought suicide would be the answer. And I know, that we've said it before, that suicide is a permanent answer to a temporary problem. And that's something that a lot of people have got. I don't want to say they've got to remember it, but that's something that I hope people do remember, is that, when we say suicide's not the answer, it is an answer, but it's a very harsh answer to something that will get better in time.
That's like burning your house down because you saw a spider.
Right. I mean, that is, again, where I bring up the question of how do we process it properly. Of you get to that point where somebody is hurting so much that, I can only speak, again, I can only speak for myself. I remember something that I've been going through, over the past couple of years, and getting to the point where I literally called a friend that I have. It's very interesting on how I even met this person. Me and my brother were actually playing video games, and we were in a just like an open lobby, and we met this girl. Her game name is Rosa, so we call her Rosa. And I remember talking to her and going, just talking to her like on a personal basis. Sometimes, just her and I just really talking to each other and just really grew a friendship with each other. And I remember getting to a point where I honestly needed somebody there with me, but I didn't want anybody to talk. And so I remember just calling her one day and be like, I just need you to be there. And we sat in silence and we played video games, through that, for about like an hour and a half, and didn't even say a word to each other. And to me, that was something that helped me during that time, during that process that I was trying to go through. Is sometimes it doesn't take, or sometimes we don't need people to come up and say it's going to get better, or this isn't the way, or I'm here for you, or anything like that. Sometimes we need somebody to just sit in silence with us. And I feel, in my life, sometimes that silence is better than having 5 or 6 friends that's trying to cheer you up all the time. Because a lot of times you get to where people try to cheer you up, and
it can get obnoxious, honestly.
Yeah.
It's just annoying. Like, dude, this isn't what I need right now.
Right.
So I think part of this is asking the right questions of yourself and of others. Because if the question you're asking is how do I make the pain go away, the answer is simple: you don't. It will eventually subside, but you can't just cut it. It won't just go away like taking an Advil and you're better in 30 minutes.
Right.
So the real question is, how do I manage this? And that's where friends come in. That's where therapy comes in, counseling. The main point is just reach out, because the worst possible thing you can do is isolate yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the big idea kind of behind this episode is that we have these general principles when it comes to grieving, and the stages of grief and the process and what to do and what not to do. And those are good principles to think about and to talk about like we are. But it depends. It just frickin' depends. And that's why grief is not something that's teachable, really. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you can talk to someone about it and get prepared in a way, but you can't teach someone. There's no book. There are books, I'm sure, but there's no perfect book on how to grieve right that you're going to really be able to apply to yourself. I mean, you're probably, while you're grieving, going to do it wrongly And, you know, like, you're not going to grieve perfectly.
Right.
And even if it's not substance abuse, even if it's something minor, like just not being patient with yourself, you're gonna crash the car when you grieve, you know? And hopefully that doesn't end with suicide or alcoholism. But sometimes you're gonna mess up in grieving. Grieving is something people fail at, you know? And maybe that's a weird thing to say, but I think it's worth saying.
Right. No, and I think it is too, because, you know, going back to something Dave said just for a second, that he had said that, you know, how do you make the pain go away? And the actual answer is you don't. You know, you have to go through the process. Again, we say it's a process because it's not an overnight fix. You can't just fix things overnight.
If you could, that would be very unhealthy.
Right.
That would make everything worse.
Right. And so you kind of have to go through it. And I remember, you know, kind of getting into just a small religious part of it. It's like I remember hearing a pastor say one time, you know, it's like there was an issue going on with some people at our church. And most of the people, they would pray, you know, it's like, Lord, you know, see these people out of their situation. They would see, you know, and be like, Lord, make a way out for them, or bring them out of this thing. And I remember a pastor came up and prayed for somebody one day, and it's like, Lord, see them through.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. Like, that's the word. Yeah, not out, through.
Right, because again, you know, you got to think too, and it's like, and again, I say this, you know, in the religious, the Christian aspect of it. Is God's not going to make a way for you to get out of something. He's going to make a way for you to get through it because it's going to better you in the end. You know, that's why, you know, when we said earlier that, you know, all things work together for good, and sometimes God will do something to get a hold of somebody to bring them through a situation. You know, right now I'm going through a personal situation, and you know, it's like I'm not going to get deep into that one. Dave knows more about it than anybody else right now. But honestly, going through what I'm going through at this moment has brought me closer to where I should be as a child of God. It's brought me to a closer relationship with God. It's brought me to a closer relationship with certain people in my life that, you know I wouldn't be in if it wasn't going for me going through what I'm going through. And so that brings me to the next question, and this is probably the last little one that we have, is when we are going through something, or when we see other people that are grieving, how can we, as a person, you know, not necessarily as a Christian, not necessarily as, you know, somebody who's going through it with us, or, you know, going through the same thing, how do we as a person help other people? We know that the wrong way is by projecting our grief onto others, because again,
or by saying empty words,
because we know again that your grief is going to be a lot different than mine. How you handle a loss is going to be a lot different than mine. For example, and I don't want to single out or anything like that, but I know, you know, Dave has he handled a loss here recently, you know, with his dog. You know, how long? I mean,
that was over a year ago, June 14th, 2022.
But I mean, you had him for how long?
About 12 years.
About 12 years. That's a long time to deal. And like we said, it's something that you have done. You've had every single day of your life, and then suddenly is not there. You know, it's like for him, and I'm not trying to like single him out or embarrass Dave or anything like that, but it's like Dave handles that part of grief, the loss of a pet, different than I do. You know, and it's like, yeah, I'll mourn for a pet, but to me, it's like I don't take that loss near as much as I would, you know, as somebody else. And again, that's not to say that the loss that Dave had, or the grief that Dave had, or going through that process that he's been going through, because I know it's still a hard thing. You and I were talking the other day over at your house, like we saw the picture, and it's like I could tell like you were getting to that point again where you needed to talk about it. And it's like I remember he was showing me the picture and be like, yeah, this was taken here, he was this old, things like that. And I feel as a person, seeing somebody that's going through a grief, sometimes you've got to just let them talk.
Mm-hmm.
Don't try to shut them up and just be like, oh, well, it doesn't matter. Or, oh, well,
so-and-so has it worse than you.
Yeah, and that's something I can't stand, is when, it's always, well, this person has this, or, oh, you think you're going through a loss, wait till you hear my story. You can't one-up grief. You can't.
Humans are selfish beings, so we do tend to do that a bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the thing that these people say nice things. Sometimes it's well-intentioned. Sometimes they think if I give them advice, they'll shut up.
Right.
It's like if I say it's going to get better, they'll stop bothering me because I got to go golf or whatever.
Right.
Not only that, it can also be for selfish reasons like, oh, if I give this person good advice, they're going to think that much more highly of me.
Yeah. It could be an ego thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The question was, how do we help others grieve properly?
Yeah.
And people, when they're grieving, are often overwhelmed by how many people are trying to talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. As an introvert, if I ever lose anyone major in my life, okay, I'm going to go to the funeral. I'm not going to talk to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not, other than my direct family. And that's not me trying to be, or I'll keep my words very short. Not because I'm trying to be rude, but because I know that if I will get annoyed if people talk to me in a group setting too much anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm grieving, I might punch someone. So just for their sake, I'm gonna be like, look, I appreciate it, but I don't want to talk.
Mm-hmm.
And but
you might want to warn people that you grieve by punching.
They know.
Those who have been there, they know.
No, and that was just like a possible extreme example. But be available.
Yeah.
It's okay to reach out and be like, I'm here. No pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I love you. I'm here for you. If you need me, let me know. Because from a guy who's introverted, that goes much longer. Mm-hmm. Like, I have a friend, and again, I won't name names, but whenever she's going through something, I will wait. Like, if I notice he's going through something and it's not something I immediately need to address, or it's not to that extent where he needs me right then and there, I'll just not talk to him for a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. Then I'll reach out and be like, what's up? Because people sometimes they need that space, but they need the option.
Yeah.
They need the flexibility from the people around them to be there. And so by letting people know you're there but not bothering them all the time, they don't feel alone, but they don't feel overwhelmed. So that would be my advice. Do reach out and be available. Don't text them every day. Leave people the hell alone.
And I think there, and again, this could be just the vindictive part of it. There is a kind of a fine line with that too.
Sure.
Because you could get a lot of people when they're going through a process, when they're grieving, when they're mourning a loss, they don't want to reach out to people because, it's like, they have the option of somebody being like, well, I'm here for you if you need it. Like you've said it to me a couple of times, it's like, if you just need anything, I'm here. Going through the grieving stages, you don't want, a lot of people feel like they're a burden if they reach out.
Sure.
And I think that's very important to let people know as well, not only that you're there for them, but it doesn't matter, whatever you're going through.
It's not a burden.
It's not a burden because as people, not just as Christians, as people in general, the greatest way to help somebody get through something is to walk with them.
Yep.
And, it's like, we've seen it time and time again throughout history of, you get one person to do something. okay, that's a big feat. If you get more people involved in it, it makes the work a lot easier. And, it's like the same thing in the grieving process of grief is work. Yeah. I mean, again, I keep calling it a process because it's a step by step, like literally a day by day thing that you constantly have to go through until you reach that other side. And sometimes you won't. But as a person, knowing that it's like you're there for me and no matter what, just, it's not a burden, it makes the load a little bit easier.
Yeah.
And again, going back to like the story that I'd given earlier too, it's like, I think sometimes the greatest words spoken are those that aren't spoken. Because sometimes you just need that person to just sit with you, Again, it's like I can think of multiple times where I've been, I've wanted people near me, but I don't want you to talk.
Well, one of the things that I think is important with all this, you might even make a mistake when trying to comfort someone else, but the main thing is make sure your intentions are pure.
Yes.
And so whenever it comes to grief and helping others grieve, and this is the last thing I want to say on this, is whatever you do, do it in love and patience. That's it.
Right.
Okay? Keep that as what you're aiming for. And even if you mess up, they'll forgive you because they'll know your intention. And they'll see the genuineness of your intention. So if you're grieving, be patient with yourself. Try to love yourself. And I hate that terminology for so many reasons, but in this case, I think it's fair.
Good though.
Yeah. And if you're helping someone else, actually love them and actually be patient with them. It's not about you. They're the one grieving. Love them. And even if you're grieving and helping someone grieving, which can happen, you might be grieving over different things or the same thing, still those same principles of love one another and be patient with one another. And if everybody could just do that, the world would be a lot better place.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
So yeah. Start loving people. Dirty, filthy, evil people. Myself included.
You're all hypocrites.
Same.
Yeah. No, I agree with that because I think patience is key. Yes. And a lot of times patience is I don't want to say a lot of times, most of the time patience is very hard to come by because you're always going to have something that's going to test you, your patience.
Yeah, you realize
it's with other people or go ahead.
You realize you should be patient after you've been impatient. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. A lot
like
of times,
just there.
A lot of times, you tend to realize after the fact, oh, I probably should have handled that a little bit differently than I did. But yeah, I agree with that completely. That patience, love, and we're not saying love as
sexual intimacy.
Yeah, sexual intimacy. Because a lot of people, it's sad because a lot of people that's going through a process, you've always got that one friend that wants to use it for their own motives. And a lot of their motives are sexual in nature. It's like,
don't be their friend anymore.
Yeah, but it's one of those. It's like you don't realize it until it's too late. Yeah. Until they've made that pass at you or that move or something like that or whatever, and then you're just like, well, now I just trusted this person with something intimate that I'm going through. And they wanted to use it for their own process. And so now you're back to, I've got no one again.
I think that differs by individual, but I also think, and this is general, not always.
Right.
This is general. It differs person to person. But I think gender has something to do with that. If there's a girl grieving because her husband died, it's not time for you to hit on her.
Right.
Okay. Then again, as a straight single young man, my granddad died, and a pretty girl I like is comforting me, I'm not going to be mad. Oh, but it's emotional abuse. Well,
I think, again,
you know what I mean?
Like you said,
there was some comedic emphasis there.
Yes,
so don't take that too seriously. But what I meant by that was like, maybe that's not if it's not malicious, right? If they do, if it's just them being empathetic. And I'm not condoning premarital sex in saying this either,
Right.
Because that, regardless of how sad you are, that doesn't fit with my moral teaching or my moral view. But a non-sexual form of physical intimacy might be welcomed from, but that's complicated.
It really is. I think it does get complicated because, you get these people that they have their ulterior motives, sexual in nature. And then the ones that don't tend to just get thrown into the lump of, it's like, oh, all men just want this one thing, when a girl's going through a process or when a guy's sad, all girls just want to do one thing to help you feel better or whatever like that, when it's not the case. Like, it's not always the case. I mean, you do have those, stupid people that will try.
When you said that, it just reminds me of one of my friends. He, I don't know. I just feel like if I was ever sad about something, he'd be like, "You're scaring the hoes," like you know what I mean? Like, and I don't know. See, we've gone too long. We've gone too long into sad
now
stuff.
We're kind of
now I'm silly again.
Now we're getting into silly stuff again.
So I apologize for laughing at grief. I'm not laughing at grief. I'm laughing with grief.
You're laughing with it. So I do want to end the show by saying, for those that have listened, if you are going through something, please, by all means, do not just take everything we say to heart. Don't take everything that we say as, valuable teaching.
We're having a dialogue.
You're an individual. Your process will be different.
Right. I want to thank you for listening to us. Thank you for taking the time to allow us to invade your space for a little bit. I enjoy it for the most part. But again, my name is John.
I'm Dave.
And I'm Noah.
Have a great night, guys.